What's your scariest work experience? I am on disability right now due to my scariest work experience. I was roofer by trade, and I had been working 7 days a week, 10-12-hour days, for 3 months. Working on a Sunday, I was finishing the last bit of work for a job at the peak of a roof. When some kids came by, they asked if they could go inside the home to talk to the homeowner. I said no very politely. They then pleaded to at least take pictures of the heritage home I was working on for their school project. Feeling sorry for them, I said okay fine, but no pictures of the construction. Just be quick and careful. Right afterwards they walked right below where I was working to take a picture. This is when all heck broke loose. Just then my nail gun slipped and started sliding from the peak of the roof towards the kids. It was gaining speed quick and I was shouting for them to run, move, get the frick out of the way. They didn't. Probably didn't even know what was about to drop on them. So I chased it. I fed myself tons of slack on my lifeline chasing this thing just to grab it as it was about to fall off. I was able to toss the gun in a completely different direction, but with all the momentum I had, there was no stopping me from going off the edge. And so much slack on my lifeline, so there was nothing to keep me from hitting the ground. I fell 15 feet onto a staircase, shattering my left heel when I landed. The kids moved when they saw me in the air. That much I remember afterwards. This is the scariest thing that has happened to me. Many close calls and all sorts of jobs I have had, but in this particular situation, knowing this is going to hurt like heck is almost indescribable. I was working in a mall at a burger joint when I looked up and saw a guy coming out of the men's room nearby holding a bloody butcher's knife. The man calmly walked through the food court and out the mall exit as my manager and I both looked at each other, not believing what we saw. I swear 1 minute later, as we're trying to call security, 15 cops ran by with guns drawn. Turns out the man had stabbed someone to death in the bathroom. The cops were there so fast because the same man had violently assaulted someone else the day before and escaped. He was recognized by a witness prior to going into the bathroom. I used to work in a dementia ward. I've been bitten, peed on, had things thrown at me and attacked by a guy who was hallucinating. But the scariest thing was when one of the electric fireplaces caught fire and 2 of the men in the ward locked their doors. The time between calling 911 and the firemen getting those 2 outside was terrifying. I used to work as a production assistant on Dexter. On one fateful afternoon, we were shooting the fight sequence in the garage from Ep. 3 of season 4, the one where Dexter confronts the vandalizing neighbor. We had a large blackout tent rigged over this person's house, allowing us to shoot day for night, and I was stationed just outside. It was sunny and hot as heck that afternoon, so after a few takes of shouting and fighting, a request came over the radio that Michael C. Hall and JC Mackenzie needed some water. I ran to the craft service truck, grabbed as many water bottles as I could and booked it back to the house. As I stepped inside the tent from the bright sunlight, my vision went black. There was a lone practical light in the garage, meant to mimic Dexter's flashlight, which hardly provided sufficient illumination for my constricted pupils. I stumbled into the garage, arms full of water, doing my best to locate our actors. Despite the various crew members in the garage moving about, I was able to find JC rather quickly. He was right under the light talking to the director. So far, so good. I handed him a bottle and turned to find Michael. I spun around a couple times scanning the room, but no sign of MC Hall. Even as my eyes adjusted and shadows became clear, I couldn't find him. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. As I turned around, at that perfect moment, the dark passenger emerged. A figure clad in black, wearing a tattered ski mask, rose from the depths of whatever heck he came from and approached me. My spine froze. All the water bottles tumbled to the ground. For a brief moment, I felt the greatest fear I had ever known. And then I realized it was Michael coming to grab a water. Man, did I look like a fool. He was very nice and apologetic about the whole thing and insisted he wasn't trying to scare me, but merely attempting to stay in character. We shared a good laugh. But seriously, he was wearing a ski mask and he's Dexter. Any man would crack. I work at an electronic buyback store. One day a customer brought by a new 20 inches LCD monitor in the box. I made an offer and he was more than willing to sell me his product. We normally check all items to make sure they work before we pay out for them, So I decided to open the box and take a look inside. As soon as I opened the box, over 100 cockroaches come crawling out of it and all over my counter. It took me a good couple seconds to realize what exactly was coming out of the box, but it was both scary and gross. I spin a sign on the side of the road advertising ice cream for a local mom and pop store. An undercover cop pulled over a drug dealer right next to me, had him get out of the car, frisked him, then confiscated a gun he didn't have a license for. I awkwardly stood there advertising orange swirl ice cream. Say you guys look like you could use delicious ice cream. I work in vet med. One day we had a guy come in with his dog who insisted that his dog's problem, I think it was a minor laceration, was much more critical than those belonging to the 5 or 6 animals already waiting to see a vet, and demanding that he be allowed to budge the queue. When his initial tactics failed, he began verbally abusing the receptionists. One of the vet techs went up to try to calm him down, and the guy lost it. He started screaming that making him wait in line was illegal because it meant we were denying his animal medical assistance, and that before calling the cops on us, he'd be back for personal vengeance. He assured us that he'd bring a gun and any other weapons he could lay his hands on. A lot of people were shaken up, so we called the cops, and they promised to keep an eye on the place for the next few days. We hoped that would be the end of it, but we were wrong. He was back the next day, but in a karate outfit, exactly like the ones that little kids wear to competitions, brown belt and all. He stood in the doorway screaming obscenities while going through every cliche karate pose imaginable. The cops were there within 2 minutes, and that was the last we saw of Karate Man. The gun threat was terrifying. The outfit, not so much. I worked at a 5-star rated haunted house for a good 4 years. It was seasonal. My job was to be an evil clown and my role was to spontaneously appear to the groups that were walking through. Many scary things have happened to me. I've been punched, thrown to the floor, scratched, and have had people try and rip off my mask. I've even seen people wet themselves and vomit on themselves. However, my all-time most scariest experience was when someone actually started dying in front of me. A woman walking through passed out in front of me in the walkway. After I tried helping her up, she began shaking and was trying to say something I couldn't make out. The fire alarm is in the hall, so it was my first reaction to pull it. My manager ran right up to me and took over. Her eyes were already rolled to the back of her head by the time the ambulance got there and they were able to save her. The next day we were told she had an allergic reaction walking through the body bag room, which is a room full of elastic, and that was what she was allergic to. The body bag room soon turned into the asylum. When I worked as a waiter, I always remember a chunky steak knife slipping off a plate I was carrying and watching it fall tip first, landing at the bottom of the stairs a couple floors below, a split second after someone walked right in front of it. At a shooting range, I hate new shooters. They get so excited about shooting anywhere in the same zip code of the target that they whip around to say, "Did you see that?" and end up waving their gun at you. Scary. I used to manage a pizza place, and one Friday around 11:30 am, a guy came in, looking no different than any of the other crack-em heads in the neighborhood. We asked how his day was. He said fine, and then we asked what he'd like to order. He said, "Give me the fricking money." The cashier said, "What?" and he repeated, "Give me the fricking money." He put his hand inside his jacket and pointed something from the inside. Hindsight tells me it was probably just his hand and not a real gun, but it's not the kind of thing you want to take chances with. The cashier slowly moved to open the drawer and set it on the counter, and the guy grabbed what he could and ran out the door. The guy ended up only taking about $100, basically what the register had been started at, since we'd only been open for 30 minutes. It was just a helpless feeling though, being in charge and having a cashier potentially put in danger like that. I was 18 and working as an usher at a movie theater. It was opening weekend for Molly and me, and I was waiting outside of the auditorium for the movie to end when I noticed 2 people around my age walking towards the door from the inside. Thinking the movie had ended, I opened the door for them when I noticed the girl was crying uncontrollably, like way too much even for the end of Molly and me. I closed the door a little confused, but since they didn't say anything to me or come out, I didn't know what was really happening. After a minute at most, the guy she was with opens the door and asks us to help her over to one of the small couches in our hallways, so I oblige, still not knowing what the heck was going on. She's still bawling and refusing to move or even say anything. When I got in close, she clutched her arms around my chest and fell into me. She had started having the absolute worst seizure I have ever even heard of someone having, let alone seeing. I spent the entire time, until the ambulance came, sitting on the ground, holding her to keep her from hurting herself. Her head was twitching insanely and she was making these really abnormal noises, so I was terrified the entire time. At first I was almost certain she was dying in my arms right there. I have no idea what happened to her after the ambulance took her though. I also have no idea why the heck her dude didn't take over. I was working for a biotech company and an unknown substance spilled on me. I was freaking out for quite a while. It was my first day of training to work as a caregiver at an assisted living center for the elderly. I'd only been there a couple of hours. I was walking up a back staircase with the guy who was supposed to be training me when we saw another employee laying curled up on a bench at the top of the stairs. The guy with me recognized her and said she worked the night shift. I figured she had fallen asleep and sort of nervously chuckled. He shook her a little to try to wake her up, but she didn't stir. Eventually we rolled her over, and then we saw that she was clearly dead. Her eyes were completely open and bloodshot and her tongue was bulging from her mouth. They later figured out she had suffered a brain aneurysm while she was working. Probably sat down on the bench because her head hurt and she died there. I figured I would eventually find one of the elderly residents dead while working there, but I didn't expect to find a co-worker, and on my first day, I was sitting in my room in Iraq playing the SNES version NBA Jam with some friends, and the building next to me was blown up by a mortar. When it hit, the whole room shook, everything was knocked off of shelves, etc. like an earthquake. It was definitely a crazy experience. I'm not in any kind of combat-oriented job, I'm air traffic control, so knowing that someone I didn't know wanted to kill me was sort of a life-changing moment. I was at a client site supervising the installation of some new major 4000A, 480V switchgear. There was a manufacturer's rep there to help troubleshoot any problems we had during energizing the gear for the first time. So everything went smoothly at first. Opened all the feeder breakers and then closed the main incoming 4000A breaker. So far so good. As we slowly close the smaller feeder breakers one by one, we get to one that trips as soon as we try to close it. It was probably wired wrong. So the rep opens the main breaker to kill power to gear. He opens the malfunctioning breaker and sticks his hands in there to check the wiring. The dude freaking yelps, jumps back, and his hard hat comes flying off his head. For about half a second, I thought for sure I just watched someone die. Turns out the idiot forgot to discharge the control wiring, so he only got a minor shock from a small charge capacitor. As the construction manager, I had to write up the incident and had a very serious conference call with his employer. I think he might have been fired. I worked in a call center for a large US telecommunications company in sales for 5 years. A woman called in one day, depressed and needing to talk to someone. Her husband just died. She lost her only child a year prior, and she said she wanted to kill herself. This lady had it planned out in great detail, which is why I was even more concerned. I highly suggested 911 because they are trained to handle this sort of thing. At the end of the day, she just needed someone to talk to. I ended up talking her out of suicide over the phone, and giving her a few other resources I knew of: Suicide Prevention Lifeline, NAMI, etc. You'd think working for a phone company in sales you get some odd characters that call in and it makes for an entertaining story, but this particular incident certainly threw me for a loop. Regardless, at the end of the day, I'm glad this woman didn't take her own life. I was waiting on a table with a little girl who had severe allergies. She wanted broccoli but without butter on it. Sure, we could do that, no problem. Her mother made sure I understood how deathly allergic she was. So before I served the side, I double checked that it didn't have butter in it. I went ahead and served it along with the rest of the meal when it was ready. A few minutes later a co-worker came running out of the kitchen with the actual side of broccoli. I had given the girl the wrong side of broccoli. I went to explain the situation to her mother, who did not have her medicine. I stood there like an idiot while she informed me that her daughter could very well die. It was a surreal moment. I walked back into the kitchen, only to find the cooks and a couple servers laughing. Apparently I had served the right one after all, and they had accidentally made two sides without butter. The girl's mother and I, not so much. Realizing the senior VP was going to be on the conference call that I didn't prepare for, 5 minutes before it started. I work as a scuba diver, clearing people's beachfront properties of lake weeds. First year on the job, I was at a job site working when I realized I had water in my goggles. So I went to clear them and accidentally knocked the regulator out of my mouth. Now this isn't that big of a deal, except I have about twice as much weight on me as I should because there is no need for me to be neutrally buoyant at work. It would actually be harder for me to do my job. Also, the regulator got lost in the pile of weeds in my arms. I frantically tried swimming into shore but realized I wasn't sure which way shore was. It gets really murky down there when everyone is pulling weeds, so you can't see more than a couple inches in front of you. I panic and drop the weeds and half swim half underwater sprint back toward shore. Suddenly something grabs my BC, where you put the air tank, and I can't move. I freak out and start thrashing around only to realize what grabbed me was the dock. I pop up to the surface gasping for air and make eye contact with the client who decided to come down and inspect at us. I don't say a word and just drop back underwater. None of my co-workers saw me. Working as a door-to-door salesman, I was made to work a really rundown, poor area. Obviously I was making no money, so me and a colleague decided to go and knock on one more row of houses before calling it a day. Two of the roughest looking guys I've ever seen, along with Pitbull on a chain leash, point at my tag and the brand I was selling. They stop us and say, "You kids selling brand name?" Me and my colleague had grew up in rough areas, so we aren't fazed by rough looking guys, and replied, "Yeah, you lads interested?" To which they respond, "No, but we know a bird, northern for girl, who is." Anyway, we follow these guys back to some house and a pregnant lass invites us in. Calls us lifesavers because she was interested in buying our brand. Anyway, as I was filling in some forms for them, things got a bit weird. First, one guy offered me a slab of H. I replied, "Cheers mate, but I'm not allowed to buy gear on work time." Luckily he laughed it off. Next, they do a drug transaction on the couch I'm sitting on. The guy buying the drugs shows me his flick blade and encourages me to feel how sharp it is. Again, I had to use my comedy and say I don't want to rip my threads. He took mild offense but dismissed my coyness by replying, "Just be thankful you can afford a nice suit like that." Next, the original guy with the pit bull made me give him my phone number. I gave him a fake one, obviously, so we could arrange a deal in the future. I quit next day, freaking not putting my life on the line for crappy telephone companies. This is a gold SpongeGar. It only appears once every 1 million SpongeGar memes, like in 5 seconds or bad luck. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.